Welcome to NightStoryX Fear, where every whisper hides a secret and every story leaves a scar. If you dare to listen, then like, share, and subscribe before the darkness takes you. And tell us in the comments what haunts you the most. NightStoryX Fear, where fear never sleeps.
Our first harrowing account comes from Jessica Allen, a night nurse driving the notoriously empty stretch of Interstate 70 across the flat, desolate plains of western Kansas. Used to the monotony of the lonely road, Jessica drove her reliable sedan late one Tuesday night, making her weekly trip back home after a long shift. The time was precisely 4:17 a.m., that pitch-black hour known as the true dead of night, where the veil between the normal and the bizarre is thinnest. She was deep in an isolated section between Topeka and Hayes when her headlights caught something impossible, a perfectly symmetrical circular patch of absolute blackness sitting directly on the far right shoulder. It wasn't a shadow. It absorbed her high beams entirely, looking less like an object and more like a tear in the fabric of space, a two-dimensional void roughly the size of a parked car. Jessica, a pragmatic woman, initially thought it a trick of light, but as she drove past, the edges were razor-sharp, defying explanation. A cold, deep dread settled over her, chilling her far more than the February air. She glanced in her rearview mirror. The black circle was gone, vanished instantly. Shaking it off as fatigue, she pressed on. However, 5 minutes later, she noticed the faint, distant blinking of hazard lights ahead, flashing rapidly on the right shoulder. As she approached, she slowed, expecting a breakdown. She saw an old, dark SUV, its lights frantic, and beside it, standing perfectly still, was a man. He was tall, dressed in a dark jacket, but the way he stood utterly motionless, facing the SUV, was unnerving. Concerned, Jessica pulled over a safe distance away and lowered her passenger window. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" she called out. The man didn't move. He didn't even turn his head. His stillness was so absolute, it was terrifying, making him appear less like a person and more like a crude mannequin. Jessica felt a rising panic. She tried the horn, a short, sharp blast. The sound echoed across the silent plains. Slowly, torturously slowly, the man began to raise his arm. His elbow remained locked. The entire arm swung up from his shoulder like a rusty hinge, pointing directly at the back door of his SUV. Then he raised his other arm, performing the same jerky motion, pointing at the same spot. He was signaling something, but not to her. He was indicating a specific location on his own vehicle with horrifying synchronized stiffness. Jessica's flashlight beam followed his rigid fingers and fixed on the SUV's tinted rear window. Reflected in the glass, despite the angle, was a faint, hazy glimpse of that circular patch of absolute blackness she had seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't on the road. It was inside the vehicle, filling the entire back seat. Just then, the rear window of the SUV, where the black circle was reflected, began to ripple and distort, the tinted glass seeming to melt and stretch like plastic wrap. The black circle inside the car pulsed once, and a single, impossibly elongated white finger bone-thin and jointless, pressed itself against the inside of the melting glass, leaving a trail of condensation that instantly froze. The man repeated the whisper, his voice now layered with a dozen other distorted, hissing sounds. "It is awake. It wants the quiet. Leave us alone, child." Jessica slammed her window up, her heart a frantic drum. She threw the car into drive and peeled out onto the interstate pavement. As she sped past, she risked a glance in her side mirror. The man was still standing there, arms rigidly pointing, but the circular black void was no longer inside. It was growing out of his chest, consuming his jacket and the skin beneath it, expanding outwards like a blot of ink. His head was now tilted back, exposing his neck, which was not skin, but the smooth obsidian surface of the void itself. She drove non-stop until the sun rose. She never reported the incident, knowing its absurdity. But every night since, when she drives past the Hayes exit, she checks her rearview mirror, listening not for the hum of tires, but for a deep, wet, scraping whisper. She never stops to help anyone in the dead of night, knowing that some anomalies on Interstate 70 are not ghosts or people, but voids that simply wait for the quiet and the chance to feed on the light and the sanity of those who drive alone.
This terrifying true account comes from Mark Riley, a seasoned long-haul truck driver, accustomed to the desolate stretches of historic Route 66 through Arizona. Mark had seen it all, ghost towns, strange lights, but nothing prepared him for the night he encountered a phenomenon so chilling it broke him. His usual run took him through vast, empty swaths of the painted desert, under an endless star-dusted sky that swallowed sound, especially the segment of Route 66 between Winslow and Flagstaff. One particular shift, deep in the dead of night, his rig was the only vehicle for miles, the hum of his engine the sole disturbance. Around 3:30 a.m., while navigating a perfectly straight, uneventful section, his powerful headlights suddenly caught something ahead. It was a figure, standing perfectly still in the middle of his lane, facing away from him. A woman, dressed in a faded, old-fashioned white dress, like something from a bygone era. Mark, a professional, immediately slowed down, his heart rate spiking. He laid on his air horn, a thunderous blast, but the figure remained utterly motionless. As he got closer, he prepared to swerve, but something felt profoundly wrong. The woman's posture was too rigid, too unnatural. He brought the truck to a complete stop, perhaps 50 feet behind her, the powerful headlights illuminating her perfectly. He peered through his windshield and saw that her dress was tattered, almost shredded at the bottom, swaying slightly in the imperceptible desert breeze. Her hair, long and dark, hung loosely down her back. Still, she didn't move. Mark, now genuinely unnerved, grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and his emergency reflective vest, forcing himself to step out of the cab. The cold desert air instantly hit him. The silence outside was absolute, deafening, broken only by the distant, ticking cool-down sounds of his idling engine. "Ma'am," he called out, his voice hoarse. No response. He took a few cautious steps forward, keeping a safe distance, his flashlight beam fixed on her. As he got closer, he noticed something horrifying. Her bare feet, visible beneath the tattered hem of her dress, were completely black, like charred wood, and seemed almost fused to the asphalt. They didn't appear to be on the road, but rather part of it. He felt a deep, primal fear. He noticed a faint, sweet, cloying smell, like singed sugar mixed with something metallic. He called out again, louder, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Slowly, impossibly slowly, the woman began to turn. Her movement was stiff, jerky, like a marionette with tangled strings, her neck creaking audibly as she rotated. Mark felt a scream clawing at his throat, but it died there. As she faced him, he saw her face. It was utterly devoid of features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, pale, unblemished skin where a face should be. A horrifying blank canvas. Yet somehow he felt an intense, burning gaze fixed directly upon him. A silent, all-consuming stare that bore into his very soul, originating from that empty expanse of skin. The blank face then slowly, grotesquely, began to distort. The skin around where her mouth should be rippled and stretched, forming a terrifying, silent scream, a gaping maw of nothingness that seemed to swallow the light. Her arms, which had been held rigidly at her sides, slowly began to raise, her long, slender fingers unfurling, moving with an unnatural slowness. Mark didn't wait. He scrambled back to his truck, adrenaline coursing through his veins, fumbling with the door handle. He threw the truck into gear, slammed his foot on the accelerator, and sped away, never once looking in his rearview mirror. He drove for hours, pushing his massive rig to its limit. He finally pulled over at a brightly lit all-night gas station in Flagstaff, his hands still trembling. He filled his tank, then went inside for coffee. As he stood by the coffee machine, he noticed a faint, unsettling odor, that same sickly sweet, singed sugar smell mixed with metal. He looked down on his right hand and saw a faint, almost invisible blemish, a small, circular patch of skin that was perfectly smooth, unnaturally pale, and completely devoid of any lines or pores. It was as if a tiny piece of his skin had been replaced by that same blank, featureless flesh of the woman on the road. The horror crashed over him anew. He tried to scrub it off, but it was permanent, a sickening brand. Mark never drove that stretch of Route 66 at night again. He eventually sold his truck, haunted by the memory of the blank-faced woman who was not a ghost, but something far more ancient and terrifying, an entity that walked the desolate midnight road of Arizona, leaving a chilling, featureless mark on those who dared to stop in the dead of night, a mark that grew slightly larger, slightly paler, with each passing year, slowly consuming him, piece by agonizing piece.
Story 3. The Cold Case of Willow Creek, Colorado. Our final terrifying story takes us to the isolated, snow-dusted mountains near Willow Creek, Colorado, a place known for its breathtaking beauty and chillingly unsolved mysteries. This account was submitted by Detective Eva Rostova, a seasoned homicide detective from the Colorado Springs Police Department, who, driven by obsession, spent her off-duty hours delving into decades-old cold cases of inexplicable disappearances in the remote cabins of the Rockies. One case in particular haunted her: the vanishing of the Miller family, a couple and their 2 young children from their off-grid cabin outside Willow Creek back in 1988.
No bodies, no signs of struggle, just a half-eaten dinner and an overwhelming, inexplicable cold spot in the children's bedroom. Eva, relying on old case files and local legends, eventually tracked down the abandoned Miller cabin, now a forgotten husk reclaimed by evergreens and heavy snow, miles of a treacherous, unplowed dirt track only accessible by snowmobile in winter. She convinced a retired ranger to help her reach the cabin on a frigid December night, believing the quiet of the dead of night might reveal what daylight patrols had missed. The cabin itself was small, roughly built from thick pine logs, its windows boarded up, its isolation absolute. The moment they forced open the heavy creaking door, an unnatural cold slammed into them, far deeper and more pervasive than the sub-zero mountain air outside, a cold that radiated from within the very logs of the structure. Their flashlights cut through the inky blackness, revealing a scene frozen in time. Dusty furniture, cobweb shelves, and in the kitchen, plates still on the table, covered in thick dust. As they moved through the cabin, the cold intensified, growing more oppressive, more personal. It was centered, just as reports stated, in the children's bedroom, a small, dark space with 2 rusted metal bunk beds. The temperature in that room was so extreme, their breath instantly plumed in frozen clouds, and the ground felt slick with a thin layer of ice, despite being indoors. Eva's thermal imaging camera glowed brilliant blue in that room, indicating temperatures far below anything natural. As the ranger shivered, muttering about leaving, Eva noticed a faint, sickening sweet scent like overripe fruit mixed with something acrid coming from directly above the top bunk. She aimed her flashlight. On the low, uninsulated ceiling above the top bunk, a dark circular stain marred the wood, subtly pulsing with a faint, internal greenish light that barely pierced the darkness. The stain wasn't wet, but it looked liquid, as if the wood itself had become a semi-fluid membrane. As she stared, mesmerized, a low, wet gurgling sound emanated from the stain itself, a sound like thick mud bubbling, or something large and alive trying to breathe through a viscous fluid. The sound was accompanied by a subtle, rhythmic thump, thump, thump against the ceiling, slow and heavy, as if something immense was pressing down from an unseen space above, trying to push through the warped wood. The ranger, his face ashen, stumbled backward, whispering frantically, "We need to go, Eva, now." But Eva, now gripped by a terrifying understanding, couldn't move. She raised her hand slowly and touched the cold, wet-feeling wood just beneath the stain. The gurgling intensified, and she felt a suction, a powerful, chilling pull, as if the stain was trying to draw her hand upwards into itself. Suddenly, the pulsing green light from the stain brightened, and the wood of the ceiling around it began to ripple, to stretch and distend, forming a grotesque fleshy mound that slowly pushed downwards, inch by agonizing inch, towards the top bunk. From the center of this pulsating mass, a single, enormous, lidless eye, milky white and utterly devoid of pupil or iris, slowly began to open, staring directly down at the rusted metal bunk where the children once slept. The gurgling became a frantic, desperate roar, a chorus of choking sounds, and from the edges of the pulsating eye, faint, distorted faces began to emerge, forming and dissolving from the warped wood. Children's faces, terrified and silent, their mouths open in perpetual screams. Eva recognized them. The Miller children. They were not ghosts, they were trapped, partially consumed, their forms suspended in a horrifying, living membrane. The eye focused, not on Eva, but on the space where the children had vanished, and the immense, unspoken hunger emanating from it was palpable. The ranger finally broke, screaming, and fled the cabin. Eva, however, remained, staring into the abyss, mesmerized by the horrifying truth. The cabin wasn't haunted, it was a feeding ground. The cold spot was the ambient temperature of a monstrous, unseen entity that resided in another dimension, using the children's bedroom as its portal. The gurgling was its breathing, the thump its slow, predatory movement. The single lidless eye focused on Eva now, an ancient, intelligent hunger radiating from its depths. The voices of the Miller children echoed in her mind. It wants you, detective. It's always hungry. It's so cold. Join us. Eva felt a powerful, cold pull, an immense suction that threatened to drag her toward the pulsating stain. She struggled, fighting against an invisible force, her mind screaming in defiance. She broke free, scrambling backward, stumbling out of the room, out of the cabin, and collapsing into the snow, gasping for air. She never looked back at the small, dark cabin that hummed with a primal alien hunger in the dead of night, knowing that somewhere in the vast, desolate mountains near Willow Creek, Colorado, a lidless eye in the ceiling was still watching, still waiting, and forever hungry. Its cold, gurgling breath, a constant, chilling presence, a horror that had never truly been a cold case, but a perpetually open maw.